Syrian army and armed forces carry out special operations against dens of terrorist organizations, killing a number of them across the country. Syrian envoy says we can't talk about ending the humanitarian crisis in Syria in light of the silence of some countries which make their territories as havens and passage for terrorists. The UN Special Envoy for Syria, de Mistura, says he had invited Syria's government and opposition groups for separate talks in Geneva on May 4th. Good afternoon, this is News in English from the Syrian Arab Television in Damascus. Syria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Bashar al-Jafari, stressed that what the United Nations Security Council says about affirming Syria's sovereignty and independence is violated by a number of member states themselves. Al-Jafari remarks came in a statement delivered at the session of the United Nations Security Council devoted to the situation in the Middle East, the report of the UN Secretary General on the implementation of resolutions number 2139, 2165 and 2191 relevant to the humanitarian situation in Syria. Al-Jafari noted that we cannot talk about ending the humanitarian crisis in Syria in light of the silence of some countries which make their territories as safe havens and passages for terrorists who are coming into Syria, and in line refusing terrorism and others as tools to implement their special political agendas. Al-Jafari asserted that the main problem today is exploiting the tragic humanitarian scene in Syria by some parties to serve their agendas which aim to interfere in Syria's internal affairs. He added that ending the crisis in Syria will not be achieved as long as some parties don't believe that the solution will come through the inter-Syrian dialogue, through a Syrian leadership and without any foreign interference. In our field developments, a military source stressed that since yesterday morning, the Syrian Arab Army units are carrying out intensive battles in Jisr al-Shughour city and area in Idleb province against the terrorist organizations who were infiltrating from the Turkish borders. The source added that the armed forces managed to redeploy in the surroundings of Jisr al-Shughour town in order to avoid any civilian casualties, as the units took defensive positions to direct strikes against the terrorist gatherings and their supply routes in Jisr al-Shughour. The Syrian army units killed terrorists from Jabhat al-Nusra to the north of Tell al-Mal and foiled their attempt to infiltrate into Tell Mishmish in the countryside of the southern province of Damascus city. Army units also targeted terrorists in Quneitra countryside, eliminating scores of terrorists. In Aleppo, the army carried out a special operation and destroyed several gatherings of the terrorists in a number of neighborhoods in Aleppo city and in the surrounding of the thermal plant and Bashqatin village in the countryside of Aleppo. While in Idlib, army units carried out fierce battles against terrorist organizations in Jisr al-Shughour area in Idlib countryside, fortified its defensive posts in that vicinity. The Army Air Force carried out concentrated airstrikes against the gatherings of terrorist organizations in Bashlamoun, Ain al-Barda, Ain al-Suda, in Jisr al-Shughour area and in the northern countryside of Idlib city, destroying scores of their vehicles and killing all the terrorists on board. The United Nations spokesperson Ahmed Fawzi announced that the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, had invited Syria's government and opposition groups for separate talks in Geneva on May 4th. Fawzi told a news briefing that de Mistura plans for a low-key talk with each of the main stakeholders over 4 to 6 weeks in the Swiss city, adding that major powers, regional and international players have been invited, but not the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, or Jabhat al-Nusra al-Nusra Front, which are classified as terrorist organizations. Some of those present at the talks would be able to communicate with these organizations. At least 8 people were killed and scores wounded when al-Saoud warplanes targeted the village of Taz to the south of the country when speaking here about Yemen. Meanwhile, a security source in Aden said that Saudi warplanes intensified their strikes against several areas in Abiyan Governorate. Earlier, al-Saoud warplanes continued their attacks against Sana'a and other Yemeni cities, despite the announcement of ending the aggression, which resulted in the death of hundreds of civilian victims, especially women and children. With this, we come to the end of our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region, and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, www.syriaonline.sy. Now to the latest business and market news with Nani Man, but after a short break.